Alonso, how are you?
I'm good. Sarah says hi. I got off.
How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Yeah. Gonna do server, so you want to grab the drive?
Yeah.
We'll start in like a minute or two. You can get started earlier if you wish. Shouldn't be too long. So we got the drivers. They said they tested everything. I brought the new cable, so I'm gonna test the new cable. So on Thursday, we're gonna do Cisco. And I want to build in some of these network services onto the Cisco appliances as well. So that way it will be one shot for us. Or we can also extend it for the future lab as well. I'll post the assignment tonight. Sorry, I meant to do it this morning, but I need to finalize a couple of things. And I've been in meeting on some since 9 a.m. this morning. So I'll get your assignment up a little earlier and the video up. It's going to be up a little earlier, but hey, Daniel, how are you doing on Zoom? I can't hear you because I'm using the PC in the class, but okay, good. So we're gonna finish up a few things on the server machine as it would relate to this session or this week material. Okay, I'm gonna get started. It's 3:40. Okay, so for this week lab, we're gonna touch on remote access server with NAT. There's a big section in the book that talks about network address translation and how to configure it. And the author talks about how to use Windows system. But just keep in mind that when you set this up for the server, it's going to act as a router as well. So network address translation is a way for us to use to translate private IP to public IP. You can group them like just at home. Your router does that, okay? Now we can set it up on the router, on the network appliances, like the upper level switches, also on the server. But on the server machine, usually most server machines, you can have an option to go with multiple network interface cards, okay? Since our virtual machine only sees one NIC, you are going to run into the error at the end, but I want to show you how you can set that up. And you want to use two separate private IP for two NICs in your server. Okay, so in your virtual box, we're gonna go ahead and do input, keyboard, Control Alt Delete, We're gonna log in using CIS40A as the prior lab. We set up the password. So in the server manager, we already did the domain. We already did Active Directory. So some of part of the chapter, it talks about that. We already did some of the records. So we're gonna come back to some of that, okay? So you're gonna do add roles and feature. And in order to set up NAT, you have to use what's called the remote access server role. And you do have an option to do VPN with NAT, but we're only going to do the remote access. So when you do routing and remote access, it becomes RRAS. Okay. So here is where I'm at. I'm going to go into the role base. So we are going to go ahead and click add role, go next. And then it's going to be role-based feature and installation, just like all the other roles. We're going to go next. And here's our server that we set up previously. We're going to go next. And here is where you're going to choose. So you are going to scroll down. Hey, how are you doing? We just got started with virtual machines. So grab your drive. And then we're going to choose remote access. Okay. So we are going to select remote access, and it's going to be here. It talks about direct access and so on. It's going to add the features that you need and click next. Okay. And then what you're going to do is just going to go ahead and let it add the features by default. And it's going to tell you here that we are going to configure the RRAS routing feature through the routing remote access. Okay. So we are now, when we look at our lab document, we are now right before we complete the install, which is step 8. Okay. So once that goes, you make sure that you select routing. And when you select routing, it's going to add all of these other tools, right? Some of it also is for IIS. As you know, that remote access require web, and also remote access is for your NAT. It's a way that we can route the data to our web servers and so on. So Microsoft implemented the tools for your web servers and everything, which we've done in the past. Okay, we are going to go ahead and click add features, which is step 8. It's automatically going to check also direct access for VPN, because that's a more secure way for us to use remote access. Then we're going to go next. And now here is when you would also look at the overview here. You can also, if you want to do the destination server, you would select this option, but we're not doing that. So we're going to go ahead and click install. Okay. So it's automatically going to put VPN for your RAS. It's going to add in the routing. We selected that. It's going to give us the remote access management tool. So in the case where you want your employees to log in, right, via virtual private network, you can use this feature to be able to do that. But you have to make sure that you set up their account with the privilege through Active Directory. Okay, so that's another layer that you have to touch on, and hopefully in the other system administration and the other class, they will address that. So we are going to click close, and oh, did I finish? Let me get that done again. Sorry, I think I closed too early. Let me check. It took it off of the list. Yep, it did put it. So once it's in finished install, you should see that under tools. Okay. And that's going to be routing and remote access. So now after we installed, okay, I'm here at step 10. I'm going to go ahead and click tools and go to remote routing and remote access. And I wanted to make my server a NAT. Okay. So once I click on tools and routing and remote access, what I'm going to find is this management console. I don't have anything set up yet. So I'm going to, and it's going to show this little red symbol. It's only going to be local machine right now. Okay. What I'm going to do is I'm going to right click it. I'm going to have to configure and enable routing and remote access. So you would right click it and then choose configure. If you already have it in place, you can choose disable if you wanted to take it offline. Okay. So this wizard's going to pop up and it's going to walk you through the process. You can also do this in PowerShell, right? You just have to name your, you got to know how to recognize your server and then use that in the command. Now, when you are presented with these options, we are going to choose network address translation. And it tells you here that it's going to allow internal clients to connect to the internet using one public IP. So all your systems within that network is going to get the private IPs in that network is going to translate to one public. Most company on the small scale is going to have one public IP, just like at home, you are like that. But when you look at enterprises, they might have multiple public IPs, right? It depends on how much they want for the service with the internet service provider. Can you select the VPN access with NAT? You sure can, and you can set it up with VPN. But if we're only going to do a server that's going to be in the DMZ, we are only going to use the NAT. So it's only going to translate that to the one public IP. Then we're going to go ahead and click next. Okay. And it's not going to give you this right here. So on your server or physical system, if you have many network interface cards, it would list it there. But we don't have that, right? Ideally, before you do this, you would physically install multiple NICs on your server if you don't have multiple network interface cards. And it would have the slots for that because the board on the server, it would allow that. Okay. So it's only going to give us the new demand dial interface for the internet. But if you have the multiple NICs, you would do that here, and then that will be listed. And you would select the ones that you have to have at least two. Okay, and we're going to go next. And it tells me that it cannot complete this, right? It tells me to shut down my server and install a secondary network interface card. So anytime that you're trying to do routing on the server, this is what I want to drive home, is that you have to have multiple network interface cards. One is not going to be good enough, right? So we can have one that's going to be for in, and then one that's we can set it for out. We can also group them. So here on this question, what is needed for my NAT routing? At least 2 NICs. Okay. And so before, like, just to save time in the future, if you want to use this feature for Microsoft, right, you should have at least 2 multiple network interface cards. Okay. And we don't want to put the wireless adapter onto a server. We want the actual network interface card because connection is going to be faster. All right. Any question? So we can't complete this without 2 adapter. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and close this now. We're going to come back here. And what I wanted to do next is I wanted to look at DNSSEC. I know some of you have done this in the other classes, but I want to show you how we can use our existing server and set this up. So you're going to go to tools, okay, and then you are going to find your DNS manager, click on that. Okay, so where am I at? I'm at this step 19. Now, in the past, we already started our forward lookup zone, okay? And so when you expand the forward lookup zone, you're gonna see this. So the domain controllers that I previously established was using my full name, and then I added the .com for the root. Then what I wanted to do is expand, right? Expand the, so we want to go to the zone that has your full name with the .com, and then we're gonna go right click. Oh wait, I'm sorry. We're gonna expand under the forward lookup zone, and we're gonna choose DNSSEC. Okay, and then we're gonna choose sign the zone. So what this will do is that it's gonna create the secure extension for your DNS. That means that the session key is going to be established for that domain controller. So in the case where if somebody is trying to pull your DNS records, it's not gonna allow them to do that. So it's gonna protect your record because your record associates, right, the domain to the IP and vice versa if we do the reverse. And it also can point to other DNS if you're using the PTR. So in this week, it talks about all the DNS records. Make sure that you know that for Network Plus, okay? And so we are gonna make sure that we use this wizard. And what I want to do here is I want to set this up. We are gonna go next and we're gonna use the default setting for the sign-in zone. So we are gonna select the bottom here. Okay, you can customize your signing parameter and then you would just have a different parameter set up, but we would go ahead and use the default settings where it's going to create the key. So watch. When you get here, this is where it's going to tell you the key information. So it's going to use RSA SHA-256, and this is the key length is 2048, okay? If you are customizing it, you can also use other form of encryption that's supported by Microsoft product, but we would be able to do this. And then it tells you here that the frequency is going to be this many days. The replication is enabled because that way that you can replicate across the child domain controllers and so on. So now we are going to proceed to create this key. And it's finished, okay? So it elevates the protection of your records on the domain when you use the security extension for the domain, okay? And that's gonna use the key or encryption to be able to protect your record. And it also ties back to each of the record on the permissions on who's accessing it. So we're gonna finish, okay? So now if you have all different zones, you can actually create, specific zones for, or all different zones for one type of IP, or you can have one zone per IP address or per segment, branch, site, etc. It really depends. So we only created the parent domain, which is this. And we have it established these zones, and in each of the zone, you're gonna have these records, okay? And that's how it's gonna be able to use it to identify which is the host based on the IP, and then what part of the network is that host lying in or resides in, okay? So that gives you a little bit of understanding on how to use the secure DNS. What I want to do is to show you how you can also create a primary zone and a secondary zone. We're only going to do a primary zone, but I'll talk about the secondary zone. So in DNS, since we're already there, we are going to create a reverse lookup zone. So right underneath the forward lookup zone, you're going to expand click on the reverse lookup zone. You're going to right click and choose new zone. That's like what we've done before with the forward lookup zone. But the reverse lookup zone is it's going to use the IP address and it's going to associate that with the fully qualified domain name. Unlike the forward lookup zone, it's in reverse, right? It's the opposite. So it's using IP to name, where the forward lookup zone uses name to IP. Make sure we know that for Network Plus and Microsoft certification. So click next. And here we want to make a primary zone. So primary zone is, it's just going to create a copy, and inside it, it would have the records. So think of it like a group of records that it's going to use to associate the system by address to name, right? And the way the application works is either going to point to it or it's going to be able to reference it somehow. So we're going to create a list where it's going to reference that, okay? Now on the secondary zone, this is a copy of the primary zone. And you want that to be put on another system, another server. This allows you to, you can offset it and divide up the task for one system and another system, so that way not one system is doing the work and you have a bottleneck or a single point failure. So a secondary zone is a way that we can duplicate that, or we can divide up the task. So we are going to use only this, and then it talks about the stub zone here, where it's going to be only a certain type of records, which is like a shortened version of the other two, okay? The primary zone is the read only once you create that, right? And then, so you can make a secondary zone, which is a copy of the primary zone, and then offset it. Okay, so here what we want is we want to, what did I put here? So after the primary zone is selected, we want to select the first option to all the servers that are running domain controller in this forest. So when you're at the top level, that's the option that you're going to select. Like if I'm at corporate, top of the enterprise with all the subnetwork, all the subdomains, I'm going to select this option, right? But if I'm at the lower level, I would then select only for the domain controllers in my area. Okay, so if you're at the hierarchy at the top, the first option is what you select. And then if you're using older systems, right, then the third option is what you select. Okay, then you're going to go next. And what we want to do is we're going to use IP version 4, and you can also create it for version 6. Okay, and what it's going to do is going to ask you for only the network portion. That's all it cares about, right? Is your network identifier. Okay, so if you want to check, go to the toolbox here, which gives you this dashboard, and then you click on the local server. It should list your IP. So you only, this is, you can put in your network identifier, right? And then that's going to be the portion of the IP that you want. Okay, so for mine, 172.16.0. Oops. Go back here. And we don't need the host portion. And it says here that if you use a 0 for the network ID, it will appear in the zone name. And so that's going to add it to the 0. Like, for example, if you have like the 10.0.0.x address, right? Then it's going to put the 0 first. So the way that it reads is it's going to flip them around and it's going to read them backwards. Okay, then you're going to go next. And we want only dynamic updates using Active Directory because we already have Active Directory in place. Okay, and in the book, it talks about Active Directory integrated zone. That's what we're going to work with today. Okay, so here it says that dynamic updates enable DNS client computers to register and dynamically update their resource record with the DNS whenever changes occur. So when you modify your DNS, the computer, the client, it needs to also take that information and be able to update itself. Because think of it like, you know, if your parents, you know, modify something or they change their name, you want to know what their names is going to be, right? Because you're a part of that family. So in the domain, it's like that, because that client system is part of the domain. It needs to associate who is the domain controller and what part of the network it's in. So we want that to be pushed through Active Directory, which control your hierarchy in all your domain controllers. So it's going to dynamically update whenever changes occur. And that's what we want. Okay. And then we're going to go next. And then we're just going to do finish. And so now what you have is you have a reverse lookup zone. Is this absolutely necessary? Not really. Most of the time we are going to use forward lookup zone. But if you want to set up the reverse lookup zone in the case where if I'm trying to, let's say I bought 500 new computers, right? And I'm a technician and I'm trying to join those systems to the domain, okay? As a technician, I know everything by IP address, so I'm going to use the IP address. So it's going to use the reverse lookup zone to be able to associate, right, that domain for the client to see. Okay, it's kind of like looking at phone number and then trying to find that last name instead of looking at the name and then finding the phone number, which is the forward lookup zone, right? So when you reverse lookup, you're using the IP address. So as a technician, type in the domain IP address. It's going to use this to associate that domain, and then it's going to, you know, find to see if that user account exists in the Active Directory, and then it's going to join the system. And you can join a bunch of Windows 10 that way, right? But in most people cases, they are going to use fully qualified domain name like, you know, kc.com or nbc.edu. Then it's going to really reference the forward lookup zone. So in the DNS, the way that we teach it like this, you only see it internally, right? Like in a network. So in order to control all your client system, you have to have a DNS and you have to have Active Directory and you have to have DHCP. All of these roles combined, they work together to control your client system, right? But externally, every single website that you see out there has a DNS, and those are called external DNS. So when you visit google.com, right, not only that Google has to have a DNS, they also have to have a web server that's associated with that DNS. So whenever that you put in your URL, google.com, what are you doing? You're forward looking up that DNS, right? And then that DNS forward your traffic to a web server. So before that you can see the website, your traffic actually gets it pushed through the DNS server, okay? And the way that they do public DNS, they have to register their public DNS, right? So that way it would associate that DNS with a public IP. So how can you get away with getting all these websites up? You use a web server hosting, you know, company like GoDaddy, AWS, and so on. They already have a list of all the registered domains. And then they would say, okay, you want to buy that or lease it actually for $100 a month. Then we can give that to you. And then when you're done, you stop paying, then we take it back, right? So that public IP is registered to them, but you're just borrowing it to use to host your website. So all of these web server out there is actually using a DNS to get the traffic to the web server, you see? And they can set up the NAT that way too, but all, you know, we can do it through the router, we can do it through the server. So now you see a little bit of the background on how the internet really is, because all it is you know that it's a bunch of networks together, but all of these websites, there's like what, close to 9 million something websites exist in the world, right? Imagine all of those DNS that's floating around and our IP addresses usage publicly, right? Ask the world. It's a lot. Okay. All right. So we already did this. Okay. And then we did the lookup zone, and then we entered that. We keep track of this. Now we are going to look at the records inside the reverse lookup zone. So here you're only going to see two, right? And the book talks about this, and my notes include that. So you have a startup authority, your SOA, and then your NS, your name server. Okay. Now, let me go back to modules, and then I'm going to pull up this real quick. So I released the notes. So we can answer that real quick. How many records did I find? I have 2. And then what are the records? I have SOA and NS. And then we want to take a screen capture of this to show that you added the reverse lookup zone. So we'll just do a screen capture. Okay. Then what we want is we want to look at each of the records. So you can just click one. I'm going to go ahead and use this one. Okay, you can pick either one. So each of the, hold on. I'm sorry, let's do SOA. I should be more clear. This should be click the SOA record. Okay, because they are a little slightly different there. So on the SOA record, there is a start authority tab, and this shows you the time to live is TTL, and it is an hour for the minimum, and the default is going to be 1 hour. Okay. So it's going to refresh every 15 minutes, and it's going to retry every 10 minutes. So in order to have the communication between the client and the server system, you're always going to have this communication happening, right? So this is going to live for an hour by default. Okay. Now, so here, what we can say, so we can say 1 hour. Okay. And then we are going to click on the general tab. We already know this answer because we set that up earlier. So it says that the data is going to be stored in an Active Directory. An Active Directory, think of it like a database. It has objects, users, computers, associated objects, and objects properties, and so on, right? So we have dynamic update. The status of that is we already set this up just now, right? We had secure only. So we are going to go ahead and put yes. And then it's secure only. So by practice, that should be done. Okay. So it's going to update, and the data is going to go to the Active Directory. You can do non-secure dynamic update, but it is very risky because it could be untrusted from untrusted source. So you want to only update with the known source that is trusted. And how do we get trust? Through certificate and keys. Okay. So for aging, we're going to click that. And here, what it's going to do is, so if the records is aged out and it doesn't, you don't want to update old stuff to your systems, so you can have it clean it up like garbage collection kind of, right? So it's scavenge, and for all the stale records, meaning that non-active, useful. So when it's stale, meaning that it hasn't been utilized, it's not effective, right? So we are going to go ahead and click scavenge stale records, and that's just also going to save us storage and resources. So we can set it for a certain number of days, but right now we just keep it as 7 days. You can set it longer, like 30 days, 14 days, etc. And then we can click OK. And then After that, we are going to click OK and close our DNS. Okay. So now the last part is to go and also check on dynamic updates on the DHCP side. Okay. So here we are going to go ahead and click Tools. Go to DHCP. Open up the Management Console. And here's your server, right? We're going to go ahead and right click. Go to IPv4. So it tells you that go to the right click IPv4 and you're going to go to Properties. Then you are going to do automatically update statistic and set the value to be 60 minutes. So here is IPv4. We're going to go to Properties. Okay. And for this, we're going to go to the DNS tab. Oh, what was it? I'm sorry. Click this. And then we can do 1 hour or 60 minutes here. It's going to drop it right under 60 minutes. It's going to give you 59 minutes, I believe. Okay. Otherwise, you have to set 1 hour and 0 minutes, right? That's how the setting works on Microsoft. So it's up to you. Okay. And then we are going to audit the log. We want to make sure that all the right server activity would be monitored. We want to do that. Okay. And then on the DNS side, we have enable DNS dynamic updates according to update DNS records only if requested by the DHCP client. And we want that. If we're going to give out an IP address, that client belongs to our network, right? Because in the DHCP process, the computer is going to say, hey, who is the DHCP server? And then the DHCP server say, I am here. This is the address I can give you. And then the computer is going to say, oh, I like that address. Let me use it. And then the server is going to confirm, okay, you can have it, right? So it's a four-way, it's a two-way communication, but in four type of messages that it's actually sending. So in that sense, whenever, after it gets the address, we want to also the client to join that domain, right? Because if you give it an address, it can be part of that domain, right, in that network. So therefore, you would want them to update, right, the DNS records, like that system belongs to this network and this is the record that we can offer. So we want to also, we can dynamically update as it changes. Okay, do you want to select this option, always dynamically update DNS record? You can, but what happens is it's going to update it all the time. We only want to update the changes, right? Because there are times that there will be many years that we don't have changes, like we don't have any new additions or modification, so we can just keep this option. And then it's going to discard A, which is the host. This is a host record and a pointer record. This is called the PTR is a pointer record. It points to which host. Okay. When the lease is deleted. Why is that? Because if in the case where if that computer is no longer needing that IP address, if I don't use that computer anymore, it doesn't need that record to associate which host, which domain, which network, and so on. So we can keep that option selected. It should select by default. Okay. So here we can answer when are the DNS dynamically update, and it should tell you that there. Okay. Only when there's requests with DHCP clients. So when a client requests DHCP service, and when you turn on your computer, that's when it happens, right? If you select dynamically obtaining IP address, that is. What happens to the PTR? It's going to discard it when the DHCP lease is expired. So when the lease is expired or gone, right? Because you also have to think about in a network, we don't just have one DHCP server, right? We might have many, right? And So you don't want to have one record for one system where you might have many DNS and many DHCP server internally. Because in the case where you have thousands and millions of computer, you don't want just one computer to give out IP address. You want to have like hundreds, right? In the data center, that's how they use it. They virtualize the machines and they would have like DHCP role assigning and managing, because you also have systems that are dynamically using like cloud-based clients. And then like if you're looking at Hyper-V and so on, or you can also do dynamically update via Hyper-V as well, because it's going to look at those as actual client instead of virtual client. And then you also want to have like multiple DNS, right? We don't just want to have one, because we might have DNS for our web, we might have DNS for just for our domains and many different sub-level domains and so on. Where's your audit file log? So we are going to go to the advanced tab, and then it's going to go to this path. Okay, so you can just say under Windows Systems 32 DHCP folder. So we can say in DHCP folder under Windows, or copy and paste, right? System 32. And then we can close the property sheet. So whenever that you need to audit the log, which that's the security side, right? Then you can go in here. So in the case where if you start having warning, right, on intrusion detection system, on people are tampering with your DNS, then you can look at your DHCP logs. You need to look at your DNS logs. And then you need to look at your Active Directory logs. The world of logs. All right, click apply and then okay. Okay, there are also rules that you can set. Okay, and that's additional administration portion. There's also like filter where you can, and the book mentioned it a little bit on access control list, where you can allow and deny. So let's say that I don't want to give an IP address to all the client that requests, right? Like I want to set the rules. And this is where you do it. Okay, you would say, okay, I only allow this type of client in this range of IP address, or this part of the network, or the properties, right? So the properties for the systems are usually IP address, right? Names, things like that. Things that's obvious for the other system to see. So you can create the rules by allowing and denying. Right off the bat, out of the box, you don't have any. Okay, so we can filter, we can, so very similar to your wireless router and your routing devices, right? The way that they put the functionality into the server, because back in the days, like in the 80s and 90s, people use server for routing, people use server for forwarding, people use, so you can forward from one DNS to another, and it has the forwarding rules. So that means that, so a good case is this. When you ever go to a website and then it tells you that that website has been relocated, and then it gives you a link, right? That's actually a DNS that's forwarding to another DNS for another server, right? Or it could be the same DNS forwarding to a different web server. Because, so I might be using GoDaddy 1 year and then they're too expensive, so I'm going to go with another web host. Okay, like AWS, for example. They do web hosting, or Cloudflare, whatever, right? So when you go with another company, of course they're going to have another DNS, and of course they're going to have another web server hosting site for you to set up. So how do you move your site, right? Programmer, you just go in, right, put that index page, and then in the link, you just link the address. But on the configuration side, you need to forward it, right? You need to say that wherever that you get traffic here, just point it to there, right? Because all it is a pointer, right? It just point it to there and send it over there. So on the router side, it's going to take that and it's going to route it to the other DNS. And web server. And there you have it. So, long story short, so, you know, on the system administration side, you're looking at that, right? Like you will govern more than just like the networking piece internally. So network administration require like when you overlook these things. So when we say infrastructure, we look at web, we look at cloud, we look at you know, your local network, we look at, you know, and then the system administrator, they deal with like database, which is also network, right? They deal with the application, and there would be application server, and application server needs to have security. So there are like subsection where this would get branched off. And so therefore IT roles kind of expanded, right? So you're gonna find the niche in this particular area, even on the security side or even on the IT side. You're gonna say that, oh, I enjoy doing this, right? Because when we teach cybersecurity, we teach it to the general group. But then you're gonna see that, oh, I want to do web assessment, or I want to do network defense, or I want to do this. So there will be some area that you would be specific, and then you can hone your skills based on that and focus on the certification that make you more of an expert in that, and that will just elevate it. Okay, because you know, yeah, you can get any IT job and it's going to be the same: fix, configure, maintain, and overall, but then you're going to enjoy doing certain things, and that's going to make a difference. So that's my take on it anyway. Or you can try different things until you like something and you're like, oh, I like doing this more, right? You know, and that's through experience. Okay, when we're done, shut it down, submit. And then we are finished early. I think we was, but at least, yeah.
So I guess when a company buys another one, they have to like integrate their whole like infrastructure. Just like the one where they have to integrate is like the primary DNS stuff. Does that become a secondary DNS zone?
It really depends too, right? Most of the time when you do big enterprise merges, right, the transition takes a long time, like a year or 2 years sometimes, because when you merge like that, you have to consider there's data, there's customers, there are things, and you don't want disruption. So what will happen is it really depends who take over who, right? And most cases, what they do is they keep them the same for the first year, and then gradually you migrate things over. It is easier on the cloud platform now compared to before, where you would be able to, you know, have you Docker container, and then you would be able to set up your things virtually, and then you test it, and then you gradually move things over. And Cloud Company does offer some services for migration and merges. Back in the day, so in the case where if it's actual physical company and they don't use the cloud, they have data center and things like that, yeah, you have to really see how the merge of IT would be, the transition, where all of that's going to house. Is it going to house on one side or both sides? Or if they are fully taking over, right, they're going to own that. Usually it's just going to stay the same, but then you do have some modifications. So you would mock up, right, virtually a network, and then you would think about how you would best before you roll it out. So you would mock up the whole infrastructure, right, like layout with virtual machines and your routing devices and so on. It shouldn't be far from what you have in existence. If they have something that's documented, that's laid out, and you can figure out the topology, that's a lot easier than, you know, but sometimes when you come in as a new person, you might not get all the historical, you know, because if they don't keep up with the documentation and the information, then you have to really build out the knowledge for that. So it takes a little bit of time. Or sometimes they hire, like they contract out to do some of the work to help the internal team. So you have like some support from contractor and stuff like that. They're there to do the migration. That's a lot of work though. it also, database, and then you gotta look at like all the files and things and, garbage that they keep, and then clean that out, backups, archives. Oh yeah. So a good company would have all of that documented, right? Like where all of the data, the essential data actually reside, because they do have, and then backup systems, how's that connected? If they use cloud, who house it, what kind of service, and so on. So, so whatever you implement, you have to back it up with the documentation. So the next person or your colleagues can really refer to that in the case that they run into issues or be able to add to it.
So like, I guess kind of like job titles that like get into people who like do that kind of integration instead of.
It depends though. Like if you are externally coming in, or are you talking about in-house? In-house would just be administrators or sometimes engineers. They would refer to like network engineers to redesign the network and then do that. And then sometimes you have like support at different level. That will be level 3. Like, they would say network support level 3, or everybody use different title. It's really hard to say, okay. But I've seen some like IT technician level 2 and level 3. So level 2, they do some configuration. Level 3, they deal more with like more on the higher end of administration. And security only comes in when you need protection and changes and audit. So on the IT side, that will be the operation. Yeah, so IT is part of operation, and that's really, so if you do take down something, you gotta make sure that things are put up for the workers, the employees. Okay, so what they would do is they would have like a secondary network that they use, and then they would transition that over slowly. Yeah, they do that here too. Whenever we upgrade applications or change things at our district office, they would notify like, this is what we're working on, right? You want to let them know, and then you want to transition people slowly too, because people might be used to where they would get their files or their applications, and then if it's not there anymore, if it's just like the next day you do it, it's not going to be okay, right? So what you would say is you would say, okay, this application is getting moved here, and this is where you will be able to access it. This is the information if you need, and then you would do some training or whatever.
So like, I guess would that be a situation where you could use more reverse lookup DNS to like?
Yeah, sometimes anytime you use IP to reference the DNS, you need reverse. Yeah, so in a lot of that is for maintenance side, right? Most of the time, and even on the regular side, like you would then use this fully qualified domain name. Yeah, it's there. Like I've seen server that doesn't have reverse. I've seen server that does, right? So it's really what you need to use it for. It's there. And I've seen server that has stub zones, and so you can do zones for different things. You can do zone for like, the wireless side. You can do, so every part of the network, you can have a zone for each, and then all of that combines into one IP, public IP. So just think about your house, right? Like think about your wireless network. You might have like 2 rooms that you use to game, right? The living room and your room, okay? And then you might have like other people that live there, their bedrooms, and they might like watch YouTube video, whatever, right? So what you can do is you can set up a zone for just gaming, and then a zone for other people. And then eventually it's going to come out of that router, which use one public IP address, right? But you can segment it. So why do we really do zone is we can offset it. Like you can throttle, you can have more bandwidth on one side, which is the gaming side, and then because people who watch YouTube or check their email, they don't need that much bandwidth, right? So you can size it that way. Yeah. And then you can just segment it where you would just use the switch to control it. So there are many ways that you can just approach the administration behind it. But you do have in business that there are departments, right, or group of people that require more bandwidth than others. Okay. Right, like if you're looking at like streaming company, right, they might need some more bandwidth compared to, you know, so
Okay.
considering that. No problem. All right, have a good evening. I'll see you here next time for switch and routing, and you know if you have any questions on Zoom or here. And then I'm gonna stop recording.